Every company's made of different people with different points of view and different decisions and different this and different that. You might as well be different. And it's those three things, time box, an appetite versus an estimate, and small teams. I don't really care about ROI. I care about ROE, return on effort. It is about creating a space for people and then getting out of their way. Companies that constantly pull people off things will never get anything done. We look at every idea as a bet. I don't know what I'm doing because I've never run a business this big. So I'm learning as I go.
You built the company around a lot of things that you don't like.
I think a lot of companies work remotely incorrectly. Whenever we meddle too much, we make it worse.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next Agile Insights conversation. Today, I'm being joined by Jason Fried, who is a business owner, so an entrepreneur who has written a ton of books, written even more articles around a lot of interesting topics. And I've been following his work now for several years, using his products, including Basecamp and Hey and Highrise, which they, I think, don't operate any longer. And I'm super excited to have him with us. And as part of today's conversation, which is going to be scheduled around 45 minutes, I want to first start with an introduction of Jason, or basically he will introduce himself so that we all get to know him a bit better. And then I want to tackle two topics that are very important also to myself. One is, how do we build great products, or basically how do they build great products so that we can take inspiration? Probably some of the things they do don't work for everyone, which I think you and your co-founder David highlight many times, that not everything that works for you works for everybody else. But the second question is, how do we build a great company? And if we have time beyond that, I would just be curious to figure out, how do you stay in business with the same person over such a long period of time? But that might be also a conversation for another time. So let's get started. And Jason, I want to give you the time and space to quickly introduce yourself so that our audience gets to know you a bit better.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Well, so for the past 23 years, I've been doing the same thing, which is running this business. And we started out as a web design company, and then we eventually made our way into making software, and then we ended up making more and more software, and then we changed the name of our company, and then we changed it back again. So we've always done things sort of our own way, a very different way. We've worked remotely for 2 decades. We've done 4-day work weeks for more than a decade. We've done a lot of things quite a bit differently, and that's sort of, in my opinion, the most fun part about business is experimenting and trying things, and not just following, but really like trying things and striking out on your own and figuring out what you want to do and what makes sense for you. I think that's the other thing that we've come to figure out is, every company's made of different people with different points of view and different decisions and different this and different that. You might as well be different. Like, you are different. You might as well be that as well. Yes. So that's something we've really focused on, from our products to the kind of people we hire to the kind of things we're willing to say and do. And it's been really fun. So yeah, I've just been doing that, and hope to keep doing it for quite a long time from this point on as well.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've built a business, that you've built several products. You didn't mention all the books that you've been writing. So you see one of the books behind me. It's this one. It doesn't have to be crazy at work. I think this is not your latest book, right? You wrote one after that, Shape Up, or was that more like a...
That was our last mass published book. So Shape Up is a new book we put out, which is more about our process for how we actually build products, but it's not a mainstream book. It's more of a insider kind of book.
It's more an insider book. Yes, that's how I saw it as well. And then you've written this one, which somehow in 2020 was sold out. Nobody knows why, right? and you've written another one. I don't know which one came out first, REWORK or Remote. I think REWORK was first.
REWORK was first, 2010, and then Remote was 2013.
So 7 years prior to the pandemic.
7 years, and then it doesn't have to be crazy, a couple years ago, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been through all of them, and I think REWORK back then was basically a collection of blog posts that you and David had written, and then you summarized it, brought it into a different format and shape and order, which made it really an interesting book for me to read. And back then, when I read it, I was just starting my own entrepreneurial journey, and I took a ton of inspiration from that. Now, I want to dive into elements from all of these books: REWORK, Remote, Shape Up, which is an insider book, and then It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And the first piece that I want to start with is talking about how to build great products, right? You started out with Basecamp as a software to manage your own work, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And then what I've heard in other podcasts or interviews that you've did, one of the great ones I saw was Chase Jarvis, which I think you did right pre-pandemic. And we will link it here because I don't want to have a redundant interview out there. But in that interview, you mentioned that suddenly after a year, you noticed you were making more money with your software business than with your web design business. So you started or decided to double down on building the software. And then based on Basecamp, you went into Highrise, I think. And later, at some point, you started building Hey, the email service, which I also use. Now, over these almost 2 decades building software products, and you build software products at scale because they work for hundreds of thousands of customers, but you build them with a fairly small team, which I am very impressed by. And I want to ask you whether you can walk us a bit through what are the key elements of how you build products with your small team servicing this many customers.
Yeah, so at the fundamental level, it's all about small teams and sort of understanding what you're capable of in a short period of time. Like you have to understand what's possible. And something I've seen when I've talked to other companies is that they sort of can't believe the amount of stuff we're able to get done in a short period of time. And simply because they can't believe it, they don't think it's possible. Like it really comes down to like, you have to believe that you can do this first. And then you realize you absolutely can. So we've built over 2 decades this process called Shape Up, which is our methodology for working. And I'll just give you a couple fundamental primers or pieces of it that are critical, which is nothing we work on can take more than 6 weeks at a time. I'm on the phone. Okay. I'll come get you in a minute. Sorry. Okay, but I'm on a call. It's my 8-year-old. He's homesick today. So there we go. So 6 weeks is the longest we can take for anything. And that doesn't mean we build a whole product in 6 weeks, but each feature we build can take no more than 6 weeks max. And some of them take a week or 2. Mm-hmm. So we set a limit. It's like going to Vegas or going to Monaco and taking out $500 and going, this is the most I'm willing to lose is $500, or in our case, 6 weeks worth of time. And then the teams that we have building our products are 2 people each. So we have 1 designer and 1 programmer per feature. So we keep the team small, we keep the time small, and we don't estimate how long things are going to take. We have an appetite for how much we're willing to spend, which is a very subtle but important difference. And it's those 3 things, time box, an appetite versus an estimate, and small teams that allow us to really hone in on what's possible in a short period of time, figure out the most sort of the best version of what we can do in that amount of time, and cut a lot of scope out so we don't do too much. And then we just keep doing this every 6 weeks. And once you get this momentum going, you can deliver a lot of excellent work in a year, like dozens and dozens of improvements in a product with a small team this way over a year's worth of time. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, how we approach this sort of thing.
Yeah. So when you mention you basically these 6 weeks and the salary you spend for those 2 people, that's your budget, right?
That's the budget.
You're fixing time, you're fixing money, and then what you leave as a variable is scope. And I agree with you. Once you do that, and don't spend too much time on all the other things, like let's do estimation here and let's do this here, and then understand like how much can we build. Just let people focus in that period of time. You can get a ton of work done. I mean, we did some work building a truck with a German company called MAN. Probably you've heard about them. Now, their regular development time was 5 years. Due to having a small team, fixing time and budget, we got it done in 18 months, wow. which is incredible because you're like, wow, and it works. But we cut a lot of the other like admin stuff and overhead that people usually had to deal with, and therefore they were able to focus on the work. Now, in our case, the team was bigger than 2 people because we needed various types of engineers.
Of course.
In the case of software, still what I see at many organizations is they're like, what do you mean? One designer, one software developer. You need like front end, back end, and back end you need this and this and this, and then you need Q&A. But in your case, my assumption is, and please correct me on that, is both of those people, the designer and the engineer, are probably very, what we would call like full stack.
Yes.
Or
yes. So this is another critical thing, which is hiring, who you hire and how you hire and what you're looking for. So for example, all of our designers do all their own HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So they do the whole thing, the full stack, basically, from the design to the implementation of everything on the front end. Occasionally they get some help from the back end programmer if they need to, but for the most part, they do it all themselves. And on the back end, that person knows the whole stack as well. Now, we also have an operations team that runs the databases. We also do have a QA person who does QA, but these are things that are not required for every project. So we QA most things, but the critical things more so than other small things. We don't have to put everything through the same process. Something that takes 4 days to get done that's non-critical, you don't even need to QA it. Like you QA it because you put quality work into it, and maybe there's going to be something you missed, and then you find out about it after it ships and you fix it if you need to. But it's better to do it that way than to make everything take 3 weeks, because everything has to fit through this intensive process that it doesn't need. So it's also this idea of figuring out what deserves more attention, what deserves less attention. Not that it's less important, but that it's less critical. Just thinking about this, not everything is the same. So that's variability is important. And to your point, it is about creating a space for people and then getting out of their way. So when we call shape up a project, so we would come up with an idea we might want to work on next cycle. Okay. Let me give you a concrete one. We just launched a feature in Hey, which lets you sort of reorganize your set aside pile. For those who use Hey, you'll know what this means. For those who don't, it doesn't really matter. But you've got a bunch of emails and you can organize them by dragging and dropping them in this different way. That was a 500-word write-up with 1 or 2 really terrible sketches that I did. And then that's the idea. And you present that to the team. And the team has all the flexibility in the world to figure out how to solve that problem in a certain period of time, what to cut, what to add, what to change. And literally the only thing they're responsible for those, let's call it 3 weeks, was that project alone. And that's the other thing that's really important. We don't pull people off of things when they're assigned things. Companies that constantly pull people off things will never get anything done.
Absolutely.
If your point of view is changing, if your priorities are changing all the time, you keep pulling people off stuff, no wonder a million things are left unfinished. You can't do that. You've got to dedicate time, give people space. When that's done, they move on to the next thing. That's the only way I think to make really good progress.
Yeah. So to basically follow up on the example that you just gave, you mentioned you gave a 500-word write-up, which is basically the requirement with 2 rough sketches. Yep. And you handed that over to a duo of a designer and an engineer, right?
Yes.
Now, first, quick question maybe, is that duo always the same 2 people, or do they also rotate?
Yeah, so we have teams dedicated to Basecamp and teams dedicated to Hey. Mm-hmm. And so when I say teams, I mean a pair of 2. So we might have 4 teams of 2 on Basecamp and 3 teams of 2 on Hey or something like that. Basecamp's a much more involved product, more surface area, needs more people. People are currently staying on the product that they're assigned to for now, for let's call it a number of cycles in a row, because it's good to get to know the code base. You can make more progress when you really know it intimately.
Absolutely.
And they typically will, but they don't necessarily stay paired up with the other programmer or other designer on the product. They might bounce around inside the product and work with a different person next time. It sort of all depends on what people's interests are, what they'd be good for, what they'd be good at, that kind of thing. But they do stick with the product, but they do mix it up in terms of the teams. Because some projects, for example, might be more programmer heavy than design heavy. Other ones might be more design heavy than programmer heavy. So if it's more design heavy than programmer heavy, the project might be a 2-week project, but the programmer might only have 4 days worth of work. So they might jump over to something else and help with that. So they might even inside the cycle, they might move amongst teams, but they do stay with the same product.
Yeah, and they decide all of that, whether they move or not, by themselves.
Essentially, yeah. I mean,
It's not
they're
you or David watching them and saying, hey, you're done. Now you go work on that because they need your help.
no. I mean, sometimes you might suggest that, but it really is all the work comes before the cycle. We shape up all the projects. They're sort of laid out. People are assigned to them. And then like for the next 6 weeks, like they're not on their own. That sounds like they're isolated without, we're always around, a bunch of people are around giving feedback, looking at work together, back and forth. But it's their job to figure out how to spend their time, and it's their job to figure out how to do the work. So nobody is handed a bunch of tickets. There is no work that's laid out for people to do other than here's the directional idea. Now you figure out how to break that down into the component parts that you need to do. So a lot of responsibility for programmers and designers at Basecamp and 37 Signals, but we think that's the best way to do it, to give people essentially full control within the boundaries of the idea. Yes. To figure out how they want to do it. And then they might come to us and go, hey, we have an idea for this that's going to take a few extra days. Like, do you think it's worth it? And we'll look back and forth. Or they might say, we can shave a few days off if we do it this way. And so there's a lot of conversation that happens, but it's motivated. The team brings the conversation. We're not constantly checking in. How's it going? How's it going? How's it going? How's it going? Sometimes you do a little bit of that, but it's mostly the team driving the whole process once the projects have been assigned.
Yeah. So you said basically certain constraints, right? Being the time that they can spend on something, and with that also the budget, plus the general idea that they are supposed to work on. But within those constraints, any pair of two can basically self-organize, decide how they're going to implement it, how it's ultimately going to look like, etc. Of course, you're going to have like feedback cycles. Yes. But let's zoom out for a moment, because when you hand over that 500 word recommendation requirement, who decides which requirements are going to be built, right? Mm-hmm. Is it always going to be you or someone else? This is basically the question. Do you have some kind of product management in place, or product ownership, however you want to call this? And if not, how do you prioritize? How do you make decisions in terms of what gets built and what not?
Yeah, so we have this session called a betting table, which actually we had one this morning. So I'll explain what this is. So over the course of a cycle, there's typically two of us, me and Brian, primarily, are talking to customer service or talking to customers, are coming up with our own ideas. We're sort of cultivating things we might do next cycle for both Basecamp and Hey. So we don't have product owners. It's Brian and I and David who kind of own the collective products. And we're sort of bubbling up ideas throughout the 6 weeks and talking about them and hearing from customers and just getting a sense of what we might consider doing. And then we will collect, like this morning, we had our betting table call, which is about 90 minutes. There's 6 people on it. And we present let's call it a dozen potential ideas. And each idea has an appetite attached to it. Like, we'd be willing to spend 3 weeks on this. We'd be willing to spend a week on this. We'd be willing to spend 6 weeks on this. And we lay them all out, and there's more work than we can actually do. So at the betting table, we talk about what bets we want to make. Because these are all, we look at every idea as a bet.
Absolutely.
There's no definitive outcome. There's just odds. Like, this is probably worth doing. We think this is going to be a good idea. You don't really know for sure. So you lay it all out there, you make your case, and then we sort of fit it. It's a puzzle because we look at the people we have and how much time is available and who's out on vacation this next cycle. And we've got a meetup coming up. We're all going to be in Amsterdam, in fact, in a few weeks for a week. So there's in the middle of this cycle, we've got a big event. So we don't have as much time. So we kind of weigh it all. And then we sort of put the pieces in place and go, let's pick this, let's pick this, let's pick this. Let's pick this, let's pick this, let's pick this. We'll start with this, we'll start with this. Hopefully we'll get to all of it. But if we don't get to all of it, these are the most important ones. And we kind of just have a discussion. It's a conversation. There's no votes. It's a conversation. And we make this decision together. Ultimately, it's my decision. Like, if I have to decide, I will decide. But it rarely comes to that. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how it lays out. And then we will shape up all these ideas in pretty good detail. 500 words, a few sketches, 800 words in some cases, whatever it might be. And we present these to the teams as what's called a kickoff. We write this kickoff, which summarizes all the work we're about to do the next 6 weeks. And then we create Basecamp projects for each project that's going to happen, put the people on the projects, write the kickoff for each one of those projects, and on the Monday the cycle starts, and they're off and running. And that's kind of how that goes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, and then, so you have now a bunch of projects and they are prioritized. So everyone knows we have to start with the ones at the top. And if we don't finish the ones at the bottom, that's just how it is because we don't know how much work we get done.
Yes, but let me just add something there.
Yeah.
The assumption is they will all get done. Like I want to make this clear because I think if it's not clear, it could mean different things to different people. Mm-hmm. We're not putting 30 projects in a row prioritized and we know we're only going to get to the first 4. Like literally we have we're going to do 4 things and we're going to do them all. We're only going to do 4 though. And this is the order in which we should tackle them because this one might be the hardest, or we might do 2 simultaneously. We have multiple teams, but we have a sense of the most important thing. But the idea is we're going to finish all of this, and we close to 100% finish all the projects. Occasionally there's something we don't get to, but we almost always do. So it has to be based in reality. This cannot just be, well, let's just shove a bunch of stuff in here and maybe we'll get to it, because then you don't actually have to think about what really matters. You just shove things in, and that's a bad habit to form.
Yeah, I understand.
Yep.
So that goes back to the point that you mentioned earlier, understand what's possible. If you understand what's possible, then you can roughly estimate what can get done. And within that period of time, if people see time is going to be a constraint, they can tell you we can take away 4 or 5 days if we cut this scope, etc. That's the conversations you're then going to have. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Basically. But typically what we'll want to do is, I'm trying to think of a few cycles ago, we had a project that was something we wanted to do that actually, as we got into it, it was slated for later in the cycle. And as we got into it, we realized we're actually going to change something. So we kind of pulled that project out, which freed up a team to have an extra week or 2 to just do other stuff. One of the things I like to have is some room in a cycle, a week maybe, of just essentially internal freelance time for people to kind of pick off a couple 1-day projects that they know they want to finish, or they know they want to tighten up. So sometimes there's some extra space at the end of the cycle to do some of that stuff as well, which is fine.
Yeah. So you having some buffer for all of these kind of things,
buffer's better than packing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. We have this saying, teams that finish early accelerate faster, because it just gives them momentum, right? Instead of giving them bomb, this is also something you can do. And then they're oh, come on. What's the point in finishing early? They're going to add more stuff to my plate.
It's great. In fact, last cycle with this set aside feature where you can organize your set aside thing, they actually finished a week early. And because they finished a week early, they were able to fit in, I think, 2 or 3 more small projects that have been sort of sitting around that we hadn't scheduled, but the team knew what they were. They knew they could get them done in a day or 2 each, and they knocked them out. And so Hay got an extra 3 projects done because the team finished a week early, which is great. And in most cases, in most companies, no one finishes early. They always throw more time at things. So you're much better off under assigning work, not over assigning work.
Yeah. I worked 3 years in consulting after finishing med school. And one thing that we always aimed for was under promise, over deliver.
Yes. Because
that makes the client happy, right? Yes. And that's for external clients and for internal clients.
Everyone.
And why not do that?
Yeah.
So we talked about making decisions, basically, right, in terms of what gets built in which order. And you highlighted that, which I think is really good that you emphasized on the point that, yes, ultimately you would have that last decision, but it rarely ever gets to that point, because you have another process where you get together, where you have these conversations, and based on having worked together probably for a long period of time, understanding each other, understanding the business priorities, you ultimately get to a shared decision without you have to take that. You also talked about how pairs of 2, very small teams, it doesn't get smaller than 2 people in a team, get to do a lot of work and finish it. Now, what I want to understand is you do all of that remotely. And you mentioned you've been working remote for 2 decades. And I know you get this question a lot because you have written this book. Mm-hmm. But we've now been in 2 years or more than 2 years of a pandemic. And I think, or I had a lot of hope that many organizations would come out of the pandemic and say, all right, we've seen how remote works. Let's just keep a lot of this because it saves people's time not commuting. It saves a lot of like greenhouse emissions. It saves like, it's really like a net positive. But what I see happening, and I think Germany is not special in that case, that they're all asking their people to come back. Why do you think that's the case?
A couple reasons. I think a lot of companies worked remotely incorrectly. So what they did was they just worked far away the same way they worked locally. And that's worse. So for example, if you're a company that has a lot of meetings, and I'm not a fan of meetings, but if you're going to have them, in person is better than sitting in front of Zoom for 5 hours a day. It's just taxing. And a lot of companies just went to Zoom. And so it got worse. And they didn't really know. And then managers would often micromanage because if you can't see someone, managers would check in more frequently. And actually the burden was quite high on people. And then also I think people just like, first of all, we got shoved into this, right? We were used to it, but most companies got shoved into it. So people didn't have spaces at home to work, or they didn't really, maybe they have kids. As we're doing this interview, my kid came in. Yeah. So like you have kids, you don't have space. It's loud. It's and then you begin to reminisce about the olden days where you imagine the office being this quiet refuge where you can go get your work done, but it's not. But it's been 2 years, so you think it was. So I think. There's sort of, that's what's going to happen too, is people are going to go back to the office and realize all the problems with the office. Like for a moment, it seems romantic to go back to the office. The office, this wonderful place where I can do all my work, where my kids aren't going to bother me and whatever. But like, no, not really. That's actually, there's other distractions at the office too. So I think the thing is that really, I think the companies that really have excelled remotely the ones that figured out that remote work is more about asynchronous work. It's not about real time. So too many companies went right to real time. They moved everything to chat. So everything became a real time chat. They went to real time Zoom calls, and everything became this thing where you had to be on call essentially all the time in real time. Versus I think the wise companies like what we've been doing for many years and others, they're more of an asynchronous culture where they write things up in full ideas. They publish them to something. In our case, it'd be Basecamp. And they let people read those things and get back to them on their own schedule versus trying to sync up schedules and sync up calendars and sync up time zones and trying to do everything in real time, which is just incredibly hard to do. So I think that's what's happening. There's this romantic notion of the office, and there's the current uncomfortableness with sitting on Zoom all day and other distractions at home. And so we fall back to what we were used to, not because it's better, but because we were used to it. Yeah. So I think there's going to be this pendulum swing. And there'll be a moment, I remember when everyone switched to remote, there was like, everyone was loving it. And then some people didn't like it so much. And people are going to go back to the office and they're going to love it again for a little bit. And they're going to realize, I still can't get stuff done at the office because of all the distractions that are there. And they're going to want to sort of settle somewhere else. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out over time. That's my take. I also don't think, the other thing is that hybrid's tricky. Although I think that a lot of companies will settle on hybrid. Problem with hybrid is it's not truly remote work, because if you still have to go to the office, let's say 2 or 3 days a week, you can't choose where you want to live. You still have to live close to the office. So it's not really remote in that sense. It's more like work from home a few days a week, which is good still. But it's not, in my opinion, remote means you can kind of be anywhere and not be locked to a city or to a place, because if you leave, you lose your job. That's a little bit too strong for me. So.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the problems that I see with hybrid, no matter whether it's a hybrid approach to product development or a hybrid approach to, it's in German, we have a saying, it's neither fish nor meat. I don't know how that translates to English, right? But it's neither nor of those things. And you mentioned that organizations didn't do remote work correctly. So if they're doing hybrid, they're not going to change their habits.
No.
Because then those home office days are going to be like how they did remote for the past 2 years, which is constantly being on calls, whether it's Teams or Zoom or whatever.
Whatever it is, yeah.
And I think that's actually going to frustrate a lot of people. Plus, I can imagine what happens is those people that don't go to the office every day might actually be at a disadvantage.
So that's the other thing that's going to happen is that if you're going to have a remote culture at all, it needs to be the predominant culture.
Yeah.
The company has to work remotely, even for people who are local. So, for example, when we used to have an office in Chicago, we don't have one anymore, but we're fully remote now. But when we had an office, a few people came in here and there, and even those people who were at the office worked as if they were far away. We do all of our work through Basecamp. We don't have a lot of in-person anything because if the culture slides back to in-person, to your point, people who are remote are going to be disadvantaged. And then they're going to be asked to accommodate for everyone who's local. And then the culture is going to shift to a local culture, favor people who are willing to come in. And then over time, like, there's really not a hybrid. Hybrid's more of like, look, I'm willing to put up with you not being in the office, but I really want you here. I actually want you here. You need to be here every day. But you know what? You don't have to be, but I want you to be. It's going to be this tension that's really going to say, like, the people who come in are the people who are going to get promoted. The people who are going to be taken seriously. That's what hybrid's ultimately going to probably look like. I do think one way to do this would simply be to say the whole company can work from home on Fridays, let's say, but the rest of the week, everyone's got to be in. What I don't think is going to work out very well is a mixed, like, some people are home Tuesdays and Thursdays. Some people are home Mondays and Wednesdays. I think once you're in that mode, it's going to be very complicated.
I agree. I've seen that happen.
Yeah,
I agree. Now, I want to use this as a segue towards the second topic, which is building a great company. And you mentioned that most organizations didn't do remote work correctly because they didn't actually switch to this asynchronous type of work. And for you, this means like writing up a lot of stuff, which maybe sound to a lot of people, hey, this is an organization that's innovative. Why do they write so much stuff? But you brought this up over and over again, that, for example, you even test people's ability to write based on the cover letter that they submit to their applications. Now, walk me through a bit of this writing culture that you have established at 37 Signals, which is, I think, the current name of the company again.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so pretty much everything we do is long-form communication. So we use chat mostly for social cohesion and occasional, like, hashing something out quickly. We usually use more of like a ping, like one-on-one. Basecamp has pings, which is our version of direct messages, and Campfire's chat. Campfire chats are primarily, again, social, and pings are more for like, hey, I need to reach you really quick to talk about something here and there. But for the most part, ideas are shared long form like this much writing, like a page, and often supported with a sketch. And so when we hire people, we look for great writers. That's actually the first thing we look for. And we look for great writers by looking at people's cover letters. I kind of could care less about resumes or CVs. I don't believe them. They're mostly bullet points of lies. Like, not that people are malicious, but just like, you'll see someone is like, worked on the redesign for Nike.com. It's like, yeah, you and 60 other people. Like, I don't know what you did on it, and don't tell me you're responsible for X, Y, Z. Maybe you were partial. I don't know. And again, I don't blame you. You did work on it, but I can't derive anything
information from it. Yeah,
right. So I want you to tell me. I want you to write up. Like, tell me who you are. Tell me why you want this job. Present yourself. Can you communicate? Not through bullet points, but through a story. And so we look at that, and that's always a good first filter for us. And I recognize there's some people out there who aren't able to write for a number of reasons, or they're not good at it, and it definitely does put them at a bit of a disadvantage. But we need writers here because that's how we communicate. And then almost everything we do is written. So we write these kickoffs, we write heartbeats, we present ideas in full form. We don't typically debate anything in chat because chat is one line at a time and everyone's fighting to get their word in before it scrolls off the screen. I don't like that. It's like, I want people to think things through and take the time they need to think things through. And so a discussion might happen over 2 days, which might seem slow, but it's really not. It's actually as fast as it needs to be and as full as it needs to be. And then occasionally, if we're not able to reach each other that way, we will like jump into a chat. We will jump into a phone call. And I'd actually prefer phone calls over video. Video to me is the last resort, actually. It's handy, but if you have to show someone something, it's handy. But a phone call, I think, is better because you get to the point and you don't have to worry about appearances and all the other things that come with phone calls.
Yeah.
Sorry, that come with video chats.
Okay.
I like this as a video format, by the way. Like, this is fine. This is great. I don't know you. It's nice to see you. But people you know and voices you recognize, like, phone's actually faster and better, I think, for most things.
No, absolutely. And I mean, the intention of this is a different one than like when you're working with your team. So based on the intention, I actually prefer phone calls as well, because the thing that I can do while I'm on the phone is I can take a walk.
Me too. To be honest, I hate sitting and talking. Yeah. I don't think as well. I like to move. Obviously, you can't do that here. It'd be very awkward, and carry my laptop around with me. That'd be super weird. But yeah, I like to walk and talk. I think better, and I agree. So that's one of the real advantages of phone calls.
Yeah, thinking better. Plus, I mean, you have kids, I have kids, and the business that I run, and then time that I want to spend with my wife and friends. There is not that much time to get workout in, but while you're on the phone, you can just walk, and I love that.
Get a few miles a day or a kilometer, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Right.
Plus fresh air. So not on a treadmill, but in fresh air. Now, this culture of writing, you mentioned several times while we were talking, that this is something that you like, right? And I guess your co-founder, David, also likes it. And based on the other interviews that I've heard about with you, especially the one with Chase, there was this notion of that you built the company around a lot of things that you don't like. So basically, those things that you don't like become the limitations or the constraints. And within those, you figure out a way that works for you, because you're not building this business, at least that's my understanding, to grow it as fast as possible, to sell it to someone. You're building this as something that is yours, where you can go to work every day feeling energy and basically using this organization as a way to express yourself, right? That's at least how I perceive it. And I find this very inspirational. Now, in terms of building the company, it's not something that you built like this. It took 23 years to get to where you are. What are some of the key leadership principles that you and your co-founder found for yourselves, which initially were not that obvious? But now looking back, yes, they are obvious. But back then, even you guys struggled with it and then still tried it and implemented it, and over time learned to appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're always changing, because the scale of your business, I don't mean customers necessarily, I mean people, has a big impact on how you run things. And we're the biggest we've ever been right now, and I don't know what I'm doing. Because I've never run a business this big. So like, I'm learning as I go, but there's some fundamental things I think that are important, which is be weary of process for process sake. There's a lot of process in business that ends up burning a lot of time and doesn't get you anywhere. Yeah. So we're under processed. I think we're very careful about adding anything we don't need to do. Mm-hmm. Because once you ingrain something in the organization, it's very hard to remove it. It's very, very hard to remove it. And so I think it's very important. So for example, we've been a very flat organization for the most part. We have more layers now because we have more people. But we're very, very careful about not creating layers where we don't need them. And making sure that the people who are doing the work have a very large say in what they're doing. Even if there's a manager or whatever above them, the teams still have the say over what they're doing. That's a really important thing. So making sure the people who are doing the work maintain the majority of the control of the work. That's a fundamental important thing, I think. Another thing is just around hiring, this idea that we always want to make sure we hire what we call the manager of one, which is not something we knew we were doing initially, but we, to your point, looked back on it. And the best people here are people who are self-starters, who can figure out what they need to do, on their own without being told, who run to problems and just solve them, versus like asking what should I do next, or what needs work. Just like, you should be aware of what, like this, you need to develop this degree of awareness of the product, of the organization, of the company, of the problem set. And so you can run to these problems and you know where they are. If you have spare time and you just go fix things, you go make things. People like that are so valuable, and they can, be worth 3 or 4 or 5 other people, if you just get people like that. So that's something that's very important. Also, I think we have this instinct. It's hard to find, but we want to find people that understand what we call return on effort. So a lot of companies are focused on ROI. I don't really care about ROI. I care about ROE, return on effort.
Where's the difference for you, Jason?
Whenever it's an ROI investment, you always just think of money and time. You think of money, actually. I'm going to say more money, even though time is money. It's like you're looking for a return that's typically monetary. Not always, but that's where it slides in that direction.
Absolutely.
ROE is like, is it simply worth putting in the effort to solve this problem? Like, there's an issue that exists. Is it worth 6 weeks? Is it worth 2 weeks? Is it worth 3 days? Is it worth it? Like, knowing if it's worth it is an instinct that we're looking for in people. And that it's hard to really find that, but you can sort of get to it in discussions when you're hiring people, if they sort of understand what's worth doing, what isn't worth doing. I think David and I ultimately serve as editors these days, which is, we want to make sure the quality level is high. It's on us to keep that up, but we try not to meddle. I mean, we do sometimes, we try not to meddle. I think whenever we meddle too much, we make it worse. So that's a leadership thing that we've learned.
It's a good level of self-awareness.
It takes a while. I mean, as we were smaller and doing more of the day-to-day, you just are there. You're involved. But when you're a bit removed and you begin to we have this bad habit of what we call drive-by feedback, where we'll not be involved in a project. We'll look at it. We'll throw some bombs in there. And the problem is that we own the place. And as much as we just want these ideas to be suggestions, there is a power dynamic that comes with that there just is. And you've got to be very careful not to throw that stuff around, because people then it can change the entire priority of a project unintentionally when, an owner says something about something. So we're careful about that. So we've dialed that back a bit, but we want to make sure we maintain a high level of quality. So I don't know if those are leadership things, but these are the things that that are on our minds as we move through the company, as we evolve the company.
No, for me, definitely they are, because you covered a ton of topics, like what kind of people to get into the business, which is, I think, one of the most important decisions any leader does, how you interact with those people, right? Being aware that your suggestions become requests just because you're the owner of the business, right? And in previous interviews, you've talked about other principles, which we don't have to go into, like the trust battery concept you've taken from Toby Lutke at Shopify, I think, disagree and commit from Jeff Bezos at Amazon and others. Now, in order to close this, and I'm aware of your time, and I know you have your child at home.
Call it 5 more minutes if that works.
5 more minutes, exactly. Now, in addition to running this business, you have written all of these books. And I don't think you've written these books to make money with the books, because my guess is the business is way more profitable than whatever you make from these books.
Yes.
What drives you to write these books? Because this takes time out of your schedule, time from your family, time from whatever else you do. But what passion drives you to do this?
Well, there's a number of things. So part of it's self-serving, let's be honest. Like, it's good marketing. And we don't have a marketing budget. We don't have a marketing team. We're beginning to finally build one. But like, the books and our teachings are a big part of how we get out there in the world.
Yes.
There's 100,000 companies that might use Basecamp, but there's probably a few million that know about us through our books and our blogs and our teaching, right? So that's a good thing. So there's that. there's also this feeling that there's no reason not to share. Now, I know it takes effort, but it's better to get it out there. I've always been inspired by chefs. So chefs write cookbooks. They're not afraid of someone taking their recipes and opening a restaurant next to theirs and putting them out of business. They're afraid of not being known. And like cookbooks are a great way to get a chef out there in the world. And you maybe make a few of their dishes and you go, wow, that's really good. Next time I'm in New York, I'm going to go to that person's restaurant, right? That's what this is about too. It's about getting the word out there and getting people to understand how we think. And then there's also this feeling like we have a point of view that we think is not represented in mainstream business and specifically in the tech industry.
Yes.
Which is grow and control, don't take outside money, be profitable, 40 hours is enough time, 6 weeks is enough time, all these things that we think it's really important to show people that they don't have to go the VC route. They don't have to go the mainstream route. They don't have to build a company as fast as they can. They don't have to lose a bunch of money first before they make money. Like there are other ways to run a business. And so we want to stand for an alternative, which frankly, actually, what's interesting is it's actually the mainstream. We are very mainstream. 99% of all businesses in the world don't have venture capital.
Yes.
They want to make money. They're not looking to lose money. They want to keep things as in control as they can. They can't hire a bunch of people they can't afford. They need to build things their customers like. They don't give away more stuff than they can afford. They're very practical. And we want to show that we are a very practical company and that you can be a practical company in the tech world and build a wonderful business that's around for a long time your own way. So we just think it's very important. We feel like that we have an obligation and a responsibility to stand for frankly, it's a different way to work, but it's actually the mainstream way to work. But in our industry, it looks unusual. So we want to stand for that. And blogs are one way to do it. There's something about the legitimacy that comes with a hardcover book that as much as we might want to ignore it, it just is reality. And so that's one of the other reasons we put this stuff in book form.
Yeah, I've been struggling with this. I've had some publishers reach out to me. I've always said, I don't care. Books are not the 21st century, but maybe you're convinced me today. So,
well, look behind you, right? You've got these books. You're holding up the book.
I'm a big reader, but
there's just still something about the legitimacy of having something on your desk or that you can give to someone else that is a bottled up collection of ideas on paper. That is it still is the best way really to widely disseminate this stuff, I think. Even though digital is, of course, more widely disseminated, it doesn't have for whatever reason, the gravity that a book does. So here you go.
Yeah. So Jason, thank you for that. Also that inspiration. And maybe the book is the best example for return on effort compared to return on investment.
Yes, that's actually a really wonderful thing, a wonderful way to put it. Our first book, which was a PDF called Getting Real, which we eventually then printed as well, was like a true labor of love. And it was totally a wonderful, wonderful return on effort and investment, turned out. But we didn't go into it. This is the thing. We didn't go into it thinking we're going to make a lot of money.
Exactly.
It eventually did really, really well. But it had to be worth the effort. And that's how we always approach these things. And if we make money on the other end of it, wonderful. But we have to be willing to spend the effort on it. It has to be worth the effort first. And because here's the thing, there are a number of things you could probably make a lot of money doing. But if the effort's not worth doing it, like if we don't enjoy doing it, if it's going to take too long, if we're going to be miserable at the end, it's not worth it. Even if the money's there, it's not worth it because it has negative externalities where we fight, we don't like the work. Who wants to work on something for 8 months you don't like? That's just not a good return, at the end. No. So anyway.
I think these are wonderful last words for this conversation. Jason, you've been very gracious with your time. Never expected to get you on this interview. Oh. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry I had to reschedule once, by the way, but thanks for being patient and understanding.
Man, no worries.
I'm glad we could do this.
No
Great
worries.
Conversation.
No worries. I hope we stay in touch. I have so many more questions for you.
Let's do part 2. We can do
Let's
part
do
two.
part two.
or viewer Q&A, whatever you want. I've enjoyed this conversation. Be happy to do it again.
I'm going to take you up on this offer. This is on video. You can't escape,
It's on the
man.
record. Happy to do it.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
All the best, man. Bye.
See you around. Take care.